And we are live. Hi, everybody. I'm really excited to be here. Welcome to our webinar. We're going to give everyone a couple minutes just to kind of roll in and make sure they're settled. Maybe you're having a cup of coffee. Maybe you're eating your lunch. Maybe you're, having a little walk, whatever you're doing. Let's get all settled and get rolling. But while we're doing that, if you want to post where you're coming from and what the weather's like, where you're joining us, I'd love to hear and see where you're all joining us from. I always like to know where people are coming from and seeing if their weather is better than what I'm currently enjoying right now in the
You
West
know
Coast.
that right now near Toronto, it's 15 degrees or something. It's really warm here.
Oh, wow.
Unseasonably warm. Yeah. I
That's
was just
crazy.
outside.
We're getting nice clear weather out here on Vancouver Island, which is not always the case in the wintertime, but it's cold. It's unseasonably cold out here.
Oh, what is cold for you?
Like -1. Just
Okay,
below
well.
freezing.
That's like sweater weather.
Yes. We've got Montreal. Hey, Daniela, nice for you to come by. Yeah, rainy in Montreal. That's good because I know it's been really snowy and cold in Montreal. I hope there's no flooding though. All right. Well, let's start. We've kind of get things rolling. Again, welcome to this webinar. Really excited to be here and chat about, driving employee engagement from onboarding to offboarding. And so I think this is, we talk a lot about the importance of onboarding. We talk a lot about the importance of employee engagement. And we all talk about the importance of offboarding, but we've never really talked about the journey between all three of them and tying them all together. So I'm really excited to have Amy Davies of First 30 with me today to kind of talk about this. This is what they specialize in, and talk about that employee experience. And so let's start with a couple of introductions. And you've all, I'm going to stop talking pretty quickly, but my name is Noah Warder. I'm the head of people over here at Guusto. If you've joined these webinars, you know who I am. And, you're probably used to hearing me talk. But I'm going to turn it over to Amy to do an introduction on sort of who she is, what her background is, and why she kind of loves employee engagement. And then we'll kind of go from there and chat about all these lovely topics.
No, I want to start by saying, first of all, thank you so much for having me here today. But I was at a conference not too long ago before you and I met. And I was just happened to be chatting to someone about Guusto, and someone popped up and said, I know Noah Warder, and he is an exceptional, HR person. So, and then just not long after we were introduced. So I thought you'd like to hear those kind words that were said about you from the other side of the globe. So you're certainly making an impact in the industry. So congratulations for that. It's rare that you get that level of enthusiasm. So I'm Amy Davies. I am the CEO of First 30. And as Noah said, we really specialize in the onboarding process, but we do we work in certain areas that cross that into employee engagement. We run retention interventions for some of our clients, and we also have outplacement support that we offer. And what really got me interested in this is a number of years ago, I published a book called A Spark in the Dark, and it's all about having a successful career in what I refer to as a reorg world. I spent a lot of time in corporate before launching into my own business, and I saw how much the flux in organizations really impacts people on a deep emotional level when they're going through it. So it really started to interest me in the topic. I wrote the book. I started First 30, and the rest is history. But yeah, it was really interesting to see how people responded, even to things like, no, I'm sure you hear this a lot too. It's like open office, going to open office. People really, it's struggle. It's change, and it's hard for people.
No, exactly. And I think you kind of touched on it right away. Change. People struggle with change. And whether that's good change or bad change, how do you help them navigate that? And I think that's what employee experience and engagement is all about, from pre-boarding, onboarding, to their life cycle within the organization to onboarding. These are all changes that people are going through. And so let's talk a bit about this. And I know you've got some stats you want to share and some things you want to take us through, but I would love to, let's start this journey and where a candidate would start it, which is that pre-boarding and that onboarding experience and why it's so important and how we can do it well.
I wanted to also say that I read an excellent book that I think is a great one for HR leaders called The Catalyst, How to Change Anyone's Mind. And that is one that really changed how I've kind of talked to people about even our services. But I think that it's a great way for HR leaders to learn how to talk to people about the changes in their organization. And there's so many helpful pieces of information in that book that you can apply immediately. So definitely worth a read. I think Kaylee was going to pull up some slides as well. But so we're one of the things about onboarding, I think, Noah, and you probably experience this too, is there's a lot of attention paid to certain parts of the process and then almost none to others. And we kind of forget that when we talk about onboarding at First 30, we're really talking about once that job offer is signed. But I know there's a lot of things that need to go into that entire process, from the candidate experience all the way through to when an employee exits your organization, whether it's the result of restructuring or they've made the decision to leave. There are ways that companies can do a great job of offboarding their employees as well. Like I said, when we think of it at First 30, we're thinking of it more from once that offer letter is signed. But again, I know that there is so much great work going into that, candidate experience, like I said.
It's a whole other webinar right there.
I know, it totally is. So I don't want to take away from someone else's expertise. But I know there's been a little pushback about where does this process begin? And I absolutely agree with it. But that, our expertise is really in the, once they get that. And, and I think that's where I would start is really there's a pre-boarding aspect to onboarding. That companies sometimes don't consider, that there's people not showing up for their very first day of work. So it's definitely worth starting out. And that's not sending them paperwork to sign. It's not sending them a criminal background check. It's really about engaging them with the business even before they start. So they come to the company excited and happy to be there and feeling part of the team potentially.
I like that you're touching on that pre-boarding piece because it is so important, and making sure that person is engaged. It's almost like sales, like even because it's like a client has signed a contract doesn't mean that they're actually going to show up and pay you the money and do all the things. You got to keep them engaged. You got to keep them warm. You got to keep them excited about what they're doing. It's the same thing with a candidate. They've signed the paperwork, but maybe they don't start for 2 to 3 weeks. So you want to have those touch points. You want to be talking to them. You want to be getting them excited. You want to be getting them access to their email and all those other things that you want, but not overload them. So Amy, what are you telling your clients? What are you seeing in the world of pre-boarding that you think works really, really well and, has that balance of like, you don't really want someone to be doing a ton of work before they start up, but you're still keeping them engaged and you're starting to get them enmeshed in their team?
Well, there's one thing that I would say that people can change like tomorrow that they can do that will have a huge positive impact on their the experience of new hires, and that is start a buddy program. And you can pilot it. And I know, Noah, you guys talk about it in the great manifesto. I don't know if it's in your manifesto, it might be, but I know I've talked to Skay about it before, is, piloting in a specific region if you don't want to start big. And having a buddy is just really having someone who's a peer with the person coming into the organization. It actually works really well if that person isn't on their team because they get to meet someone else. But they can connect with that person. That buddy can call them a week before they start and say, hey, I'm here for you. Do you have any questions as you're getting started? Anything maybe they don't want to ask their manager about, certain things that they'd feel more comfortable asking a peer about before they get started. That buddy can show up on a Teams call, or they can greet them at the front door on their first day and show them around the office. They can fill in some of the gaps for the manager because managers are busy doing things too on their new hires' first few days. So that's a great way to get them really engaged. there's other little things you can do. You can send them little fun facts about the business before they start. So, or just little pieces of information. Maybe you've run some really neat campaigns previously, sending them that information just to get them excited. It shouldn't be anything too heavy. But yeah, those are a few ideas that we've shared with our clients that seem to be pretty impactful.
I love the buddy program. We've got the buddy program here. It's great.
Yeah.
It helps with that institutional knowledge that isn't necessarily documented anywhere, of just like, hey, who do I go to when I have questions about this? And who
Yeah.
do I go to when I have questions about this? Or just like, I didn't see this anywhere in my onboarding package, but what does this mean? And, or like,
Yeah.
what is this strange acronym that only exists in our industry and I have no idea what it actually means?
We help our clients build acronym lists into their onboarding platform and it's always a surprise how many people in the organizations want that acronym list. I've heard the expression before, to speak another language is to possess another soul. And I find that if you don't know the acronyms that are being said, especially if you're a hybrid person working remotely, you might not have someone to lean over to and say, hey, what is that? What does that mean? And you can't Google it because it's really maybe very specific to your company. But I thought I'd show these few slides and then we can take this deck down just to talk about why businesses might want to take a look at that onboarding program and why engagement is so important. And we talk about this session as like, don't let the love run out, because it is sort of the week of love. But, we want to make sure that we make a joke at First 30 that we help you love bomb your employees to get them really engaged at the beginning. And that's so important because we're having this cognitive experience when we first engage with a business. It's called imprinting. And we are highly cognitively receptive when we're engaging with new stimulus, which includes the new people you're working with in a new organization, when we engage with them for the very first time. And that's why we have to hit them early on with this great messaging about our company and show them all the great things about working with them and demonstrating that we're organized and efficient right from the very beginning, because we can lose them very quickly. And once we've lost them, it can be really hard to gain them back. We build what's called a belief system. And once that belief system is established, it can be almost impossible to change. And we know that there is so much churn across North America. It's at approximately a quarter of your employees will leave each year. And in industries like we work a lot in manufacturing, and we're seeing that's even higher. It's about 30% will leave each year. So that's a big number. And we know that new hires are very vulnerable to churn. We were just talking about pre-boarding, Noah, and that's important to think about, because when your employees are coming to work for you, they've probably been, looking at all kinds of other businesses, and it's, there's a labor shortage right now. So if they don't feel good about being at your business, they get another job offer. Maybe they take that job offer if they're not feeling, if that imprinting period wasn't very positive for them. And we know that about 33% will leave within the first 6 months. And we know as well that most of the reasons why people leave an organization are in fact preventable, which means that, things like the work you guys are doing at Guusto and the work we're doing at First 30, these things really make a difference because they do change people's outcomes and outcome for the organization, because maybe people will feel like there is career opportunity. If you look at total rewards, there is options for businesses to improve all of these things. And we know that, you can't stop someone necessarily from retirement, but I would say maybe you can make it easier for people to job share. Not everyone wants to fully retire, but there's not a ton of options for them to work, casually or, alongside someone else and share a job with somebody.
Yeah, I think you're touching on something there, which is like flexibility. Is people really like flexibility now, and whether that's flexibility in their career, flexibility in how they're rewarded, flexibility in how they learn, flexibility in how they retire, and how like they're being helped with their family obligations or relocation if you have to have that. But I think those a lot of those things that, you know, providing a bit of flexibility for people goes a really long way.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And it gives people some semblance of control of their own outcome as well. And, you know, I've done a lot of research into well-being in when I worked in corporate. And we know that the worst feeling you have is when your well-being really dips when the control of your own outcome is taken away from you. And I'm thinking about things like working remotely and people being asked to come back in the office, right? Or not, maybe not ask, voluntold to come back. And that's taking the control away, right?
Yeah, people do like that control, and it starts with pre-boarding and giving people some control over what they can do before they start with an organization as well.
Yeah, that's right. And I know you and I are both parents, Noah. And one of the things that people might want to ask with, and that's why buddies are so great, is like, what time will I really get out of the office? Because I actually have to pick up my child from daycare by a certain time. So those things can really be helpful to people.
Or the talking point of like, hey, you know, the HR person and my manager said it was really flexible here and I can leave at any time to pick up my kids. Is that actually true? Can I do that?
Yes.
Can I do that?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
you get that little bit of a pulse, because we're all trying to sell our companies as best we can. And, you know, you want to say all the right things, but sometimes reality is not quite what's being sold, unfortunately.
You know, and there was a number of years ago, I was applying for a leadership position at a large global company, and they were really reinforced for me when I was going through the interview process that it was a family-friendly company, and that's kind of how they sold themselves. And then I was a single mom with 2 young kids at the time, and I went in for the interview, and I was pretty clear about that. And then the global HR person was in the interview, and the local HR person was there, and the local HR person made a joke to me, and I felt like she was trying to tell me something because she knew how important this was to me. Oh, sometimes I get home at the end of the week and my children don't recognize me. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is not going to work for me, right? So like you said, they were kind of selling it on that. In the job ad, it looked great, but I could see when the rubber hit the road, I was going to be in some trouble if I accepted that job. And I think one of the important things we want to consider as employers, and it's funny because I often wonder who is responsible for all this money that an employer is losing when they need to replace people for jobs, because we know that it can cost about 30 to 50% of an employee's salary to replace them. And I do wonder who owns that, right? Because if you look at the hard numbers, if someone makes $45,000 a year, that's, you know, it's a lot to replace them. And you times that by 10 or 20 or whatever 25% of your workforce is, that's a lot of money in a year to be losing when you can look at interventions like the kind of thing that we do to help kind of save that time and money and energy, lost days of work that is going to be experienced. And that's one of the reasons, don't just love bomb, but keep that love going. Like we say, don't let that love run out, because you want to make sure that you keep people. And we know from what we look at, obviously we're pretty focused on onboarding, but we know that an effective onboarding program, because of what's going on cognitively, because of that imprinting experience, that you can really reduce your new hire turnover if you focus on that stage in the process. So like I said, it can cost you less then. And I think that's it with my slides. So we can take those down. But if you want a copy of those, I've actually set up a landing page on the First 30 site where you can steal my slides and use that information. And I know that the Kaylee's going to share that, and I can share it in the chat maybe at some point as well, so that you can access all of those slides and that information.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for running through that, Amy. And I think that's a great way to kind of level set of like, why is it so important that we're focusing on employee engagement? And first, like starting at the onboarding piece. And we talked a little bit about pre-boarding and what you can be doing there. Now let's talk about onboarding, the actual fact of like somebody steps into the door. And onboarding, there's different stats that are thrown around. Some people say it's 3 months. Some people say it's 6 months. Some people say it's the first year of someone's tenure in an organization. So what are you seeing when onboarding, or what are you talking to your clients about, or what recommendations do you see, best practices? Like let's arm these folks that are here today with what are a couple things they can walk away with. They're like, I can do that for our onboarding program. I can make changes here. I can make it so that our onboarding program is a little bit better. So love to hear what you're seeing. We can share a couple of things from Guusto as well, but let's chat about what you're doing.
Yeah. So one of the things that we find is companies, it happens, right? Things can be disorganized when people show up. I know I've definitely had this experience starting a new job, but you might not have your tools and equipment that you need to get going right away. And that can be really awkward. It can be really awkward for the manager too, because they're like, oh my gosh, I thought you were going to have your computer and a phone. I don't really know what to do with you otherwise. That's where a buddy can really help fill the gaps. But one of the biggest mistakes I think that employers make is people make comments like, oh, it's normal. That's the sort of thing that happens around here. Like, do not normalize anything that isn't running smoothly, because that is a way that someone's going to feel like, if this company can't take care of me on my first day, then what is it like with customers and clients? And is this business really going to be a sustainable business where I'm not going to end up losing my job, right? Because look at what's going on in the tech industry right now with all the layoffs. So that's definitely something that employers and managers should consider. Like, plan for the worst case scenario. I used to teach presentation skills courses, and I used to say to everyone, expect your technology to fail and plan for that. You have to have a backup plan. But the other thing that we always say, and we notice a lot, is some companies just overload people when they start a new job. And we say that onboarding should not be an avalanche of information. It should be a babbling brook of information, so that it's sort of coming to you piece by piece, because we have really bad memories in general. We say like memories are fragile, but when you are learning, you're exposed to all these new things, you're probably a little bit nervous. That is going to mean that your memory is going to be even worse. And we talk about, when you're onboarding, your memory is a sieve. And what can companies do to compensate for that? Well, definitely they can feed out the information to you in bite-sized chunks. But I know there's going to be people on this call today that are going to say, well, I actually don't have a way to control that, because HR sort of comes in, or like there's things in place that I can't help, that people are going to be overwhelmed by the information. Maybe that's an opportunity then for you to make sure your new hires know where to find all of the information that they're being exposed to so early on. So maybe there's a SharePoint, maybe there's a platform where it exists. Maybe you can find a way to make it available to them. And the other thing is task-based videos. I know it's like, whenever I don't know how to do something technological or whatever it is, I Google it. I'm sure a lot of people do, but make there a way for people to Google it in your company. So make sure they know if they need to fill out an expense form, maybe if you can even film a little video for them on your computer and give it to them, then they're going to be so much better off. Because I know it's just so embarrassing to have to go to your manager after like 3 months and say, I know I got training on how to file my expenses, or I know you've showed me this before, but I haven't done it for a month or two. Can you show me again? Right?
Yeah, that's I think that video piece, it's such an easy lift, because you're gonna have to show it to people anyways. And so as a like HR leader or manager or whomever, or even a finance person, just like, I'm gonna record this video once, and then I'm gonna attach it to our document that says how to do this. And then I'll attach it somewhere else so it's easily accessible. Just like, hey, here's a video on how to do this. And it's people don't have to read a whole policy. They can just watch the 30-second video and be like, all right, I know how to do this now.
And companies like Manulife, they have all the videos done for you. All the clicks are, they have the video that your employee can watch. It's just about giving them the link to that video so that they never forget. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be nuances in every organization for certain things. But yeah, a lot of times you can just lean on your suppliers for that sort of thing.
Yeah, I love it. And it's, the overloading can happen so easily. And like you said, sometimes you can't help it. Sometimes you just you don't have a program or a service that you can schedule things to go out in either your Teams or an email or a Slack or whatever. But letting people know where they can go back for it, or even setting the expectation of look, I understand this is a lot right now. I don't expect you to get all of this in the first few days. This is for you to slowly pick away at over the next 2 to 3 weeks. And if you have any questions about any of that stuff, please don't hesitate to ask. And letting people know that they can ask questions, and letting them know that it's okay to ask questions, and reinforcing that at all levels in the organization, I think is really important. As the HR leader, you reinforce that. As the buddy, you reinforce that. As the manager, you reinforce that. Just please ask questions. We'd rather you ask questions than try and navigate this in the dark.
And that you bring up such an amazing point there. It's not just about it's not just about saying it. It's about showing it through your body language. So we can all say, oh yeah, open door, whatever. You can ask me anything. But then when someone asks you, it's hard sometimes because you're going to be busy. But when they ask, how you receive it matters, right? And it could be, hey, I can't show you that right now because I'm a little busy, but let's reconnect at 3:00 today and I'm going to walk through it with you, right? So that you're demonstrating to them that it's a good thing to ask and you're open to it and you are going to help them. Yeah. Another thing that companies can do is we have noticed working with so many clients on their onboarding programs that some are designed for someone who's, highly extroverted. And I would say I'm actually one of those people, and I still don't like this. When you go into an organization and it's overwhelming meetings and and I work for really friendly companies where it's I think everyone in the business has shown up to say hi to me on the first day. And I can't remember anyone's name. It's so uncomfortable. And you're just sort of this smiling bobblehead for your first 2 or 3 days, but you're kind of crushed inside and you're exhausted. So one thing I recommend is break up the day for people, but also tell them, hey, I'm giving you 30 minutes here. This is a gift of time. Go and do whatever you need to do to recharge and refresh. Because we get it. The first few days can be overwhelming. And then make sure if they're meeting the team, maybe they don't meet everyone on the team on the first day. If you have a team of 17 people, have little meetings with 5 at a time. And then when you have those meetings, try to have somebody maybe facilitating those meetings, lead the meeting. So they're making sure that the person is comfortable and that it's tendency with teams who are really close, and that's a good thing, to have all kinds of inside jokes and things that everybody knows about, but that's going to make your new hire feel like an outsider. And that's not a great feeling when you're starting a job. And I think it happens with people who are really well-intentioned. It's just a natural human behavior.
That's a great point. I love the making sure that those meetings are inclusive, they're structured, you're making sure that people are feeling welcome. And I thought of another thing when you're talking about that of extrovert versus introvert is also those who may be more technology adaptive or comfortable, and those who are maybe not so much. And often we sometimes forget of just set up your 1Password account. It's how do you do that? Oh, just set up your email signature. Just set up your new corporate email. It's I don't know how to do any of this. So just making sure again, there's instructions and maybe a little video that comes with that and a training program or whatever of just hey, I'm going to run you through how we do this here at Guusto or at First 30 and make sure that, you understand how this is all doing. And so, it can be really easy to overwhelm people, both with meetings and the technology that they're maybe asking to start using if they're not used to using that, especially if they're changing industries. And so someone's coming from manufacturing into retail or vice versa, or coming into tech from something else. It's it can be overwhelming, the amount of tools that company uses, and you're like, oh my goodness, I don't know how to use any of this.
And the worst is when you have an email signature and it's not like, it doesn't comply with the email signature you're supposed to have, and you send it to someone, and then that someone goes to your leader and says, why are they using that email signature? And it's such an awful feeling, isn't it? Because you feel like you've already made a mistake, when it would be so easy to have a guide for that.
Yeah.
The other thing is, it's not just about setting up for extroverts, but it's also, we have situations where we find it's like completely set up for someone who's very introverted or like, learns better. When I say introversion, I don't mean whether you're sociable or not. I mean how you learn. And we know that someone who's described as introverted learns by review. And so what we see happen sometimes is you're kind of pointed to a SharePoint and say, review this for the next 3 days, sign all these documents. And that's not motivating and I don't think it's motivating for anyone, even people who are maybe more inclined to want to learn by reviewing. There needs to be a little bit of a balance between your engagement with people and your kind of review of documents.
I think that's totally true. Like having somebody walk you through some things, watching some videos, reading some things, learning through meetings with teammates. It's got to be a little bit of diverse in how you're, sending your materials to people, and not just a one size fits all.
Yeah, and technology is not a replacement for human interaction. And I say that as someone who runs an HR tech company, right? We see technology as there to enable human connection. So we're trying to take away a lot of what, could be automated so that people have more time to spend with their new hires, talking about things that matter or learning about things that matter. So technology should never be seen as a replacement for that human connection.
Especially in this remote hybrid world we are all working in nowadays, of like where we're often craving some of that human interaction a bit more.
Yeah, totally.
We're about halfway through our time, and so let's move from the onboarding to sort of employee journey. So this is, let's say 9 months to however many years they tend to stay at your organization in their career growth there. What are you helping your clients do? What are you seeing out in the marketplace? What are you seeing best practices of like keeping that engagement going? Because it's you're right. It's so important to like have that imprint, really get people involved first thing, but you kind of got to keep those expectations going, because if they just like after the first 9 months, they're just like, oh, no one's talking to me anymore, and I don't keep getting that engagement. People aren't recognizing me for my contributions. My manager's not giving me feedback. What is my career growth? They disengage very quickly and start looking somewhere else. So what are you seeing? Some tips that we can share with folks to kind of keep that engagement high and kind of, you're still going up. You're not starting to go
down. Yeah, you have to come through on the promise that you made in the hiring process and in the onboarding process. It really means nothing if you don't, like we said for the session, keep that love alive, right? Keep consistent with what you promised to deliver when they first joined. So one of the things that really surprises me, and I'm sure you find this as well, Noah, is so many companies will like throw their hand up when you say, hey, do you guys run exit interviews? Which are great, which we totally believe in. But then you're like, who runs stay interviews? And it's like, and they're not really running them. But, stay interviews make a huge difference because you get the feedback. And there's so many different ways we can run stay interviews, right? Like we can hire an objective third party to run them for us. Sometimes you get a little more information there. Can be a big investment though. You can have the manager do it, or you can have HR do it. And the content you get back, the feedback you get back can be incredibly important, as long as and that's the other thing I would say, you get this feedback, act on the feedback. Don't ask people, a lot of companies do a great job of running pulse surveys, great place to work surveys, and they like win the award, which is great, but they don't then action the feedback that's given. And I think that that will really cause your engagement to dip if you don't share the findings, or at least some of the findings, with your team, and then take action on the items that people bring up, because it's really demoralizing to contribute to these kinds of studies and then have nothing change, right? So if you're an organization that's going to do it, that's great, but we shouldn't be doing those studies for the purpose of, it's great to get the award and it's great to get the accolades. When we work with our clients, we, as I was saying before, we run retention interventions. So we'll run a survey, but it's really not for the benchmarking purposes so that they can compare to other businesses. It's not for an award. It's purely to take action and stop the churn that is happening in the business. And I think that's when you do your best, is when you're really prepared to do something and make changes. So that's what I would say. Make sure you run those stay interviews. And if you're looking for a trigger, because we get asked this a lot, if you're looking for a trigger to run the stay interviews, if you notice one of your employees has gone quite quiet, that's probably a good time. You can work them into your weekly or bi-weekly meetings with a manager as well, though. They can have a few little questions they'll ask at the end of each one-to-one to kind of as a check-in. And then at a year, you should definitely make sure you have it at a year, because that's around the time that an employee might be starting to scope out what's going on around them, because they might be ready to grow. So those are some of the triggers for that. And then, of course, succession planning and making sure you're keeping in touch with your employees, finding out what their goals are. Don't wait for the annual review for them to say, hey, I'd like a senior manager title now. Well, if I had known that a year ago, I could have helped you along the way. Ask them where they want to be in a year at their annual review. So as a manager, you can help get them the exposure and experience they need to get to that level, right? And then, of course, the kinds of things that your company offers, Noah, in terms of having great programs that employees can participate in. I'd love to know more about what you've seen with some of your clients and the successes that you've had with your programs.
Yeah. And I think you touched on that of I think the stay interviews are so important. You can't rely just on pulse surveys. Sometimes they give you that sort of that trigger or that bell of hey, maybe there's a group of people you need to be talking to. Yeah. But incorporating it as an ongoing practice is so important. And you can't just be sometimes when that person's gone quiet, it's already too late. You may not be able to bring them back.
Yeah.
But then talking about recognition and total rewards and looking at your benefits programs and all those things, those are also so important for keeping engagement alive. And talking specifically about recognition of just it's a great way to have people feel seen and show some compassion. And especially during this sort of tumultuous time we're kind of finding ourselves in of often, and I think the really important part is getting those executives involved, because it's really easy for peers to give recognition to each other, or a frontline manager to give recognition to their frontline, to their team. But once you start getting those directors and those VPs and even the C-suite involved in giving that recognition, when it goes down to those frontliners, or it goes down to those people that don't have direct contact with those executives, the impact is so much more felt. And we have some client stories around this where a janitor of a hospital gets a piece of recognition from the CEO, and they're just oh my God, I didn't even know this person knew I existed. That just, you're just oh, I'm seeing my contributions do matter to someone at the very top of this organization. And they're thanking me for mopping the floor when they're trying to figure out how to make sure this company stays solvent and for the next few years. So having that level of engagement you need to have it at all levels in the organization. And it can't just be an HR initiative. It can't just be your manager's job. It's got to be part of the culture, and it's got to be kind of woven throughout all levels of the organization. And I think that kind of goes with a lot of what we're talking about of the stay interview. Maybe your manager's asking a few questions, but maybe HR is stepping in once a year just to talk to everyone in the organization that's spread out throughout the year. Okay, this quarter, I'm going to talk to the R&D department, or I'm going to talk to 20% of the R&D department. And this quarter, I'm going to talk to 20% of the marketing department, and so on and so forth. And just making sure that you're kind of touching base with everyone at a regular interval. And then also your managers are doing it. And also, you know, skip level is so great for executives to be talking to, you know, their directors' direct reports, or their VPs' direct reports, or their VPs' direct reports, and this like getting that pulse outside of what they're seeing at the executive level is also very important.
Well, and because some people are really great at managing up, aren't they? And so if and you know, I remember being in the corporate world, and you know, I personally, you know, tried to deal with any situation directly, but it's tough to do, and not everyone can do that. And I know that people talk to me about the fact they tried to have that skip level meeting because something was really seriously going wrong with their manager, and they were told, nope, talk to your manager.
Yeah.
But if your manager's the problem, and it's a serious problem, how do you then make that work? And you know, that really brings me to and sorry, I was going to also say what I love about what you guys do is it does give anyone the opportunity to recognize people in their organization. And so it does take a lot of the work out of HR, right?
Mm-hmm. And you know, like you said, it's not about removing the human connection. It's about automating things so there can be more human connection. And so making it easier for managers to recognize people, making it easier for HR people to recognize and empower those managers to recognize people, making it easier for that CEO to send recognition to that janitor that they saw doing a great job as they're walking through the hall. Maybe they couldn't do it in the moment. Maybe they couldn't do it, you know, the next day, but it's stuck in their head. And so, okay, I have the tool to do this now, and I can send that person recognition instead of like, how am I going to find that person and do it, or send them an email? I don't know who that person, like, I don't know how to do that, but I can find them in the system and send it. Or I can ping their manager and say, this person at this time was doing an amazing job. I want to recognize them.
And it's never too late.
Yes.
I find that people think that, oh, this happened like 3 months ago, but just do it, right? Like, just do it. I find that's kind of funny. It's never too late to send someone a thank you.
It's true.
But what I was going to say is we find that a lot of the reason that people churn in businesses is because of difficult relationships with colleagues, and specifically difficult relationships with their manager. And sometimes these things happen, right? You could have all the best intentions. People don't always get along, or some person works a certain way and it doesn't really, you know, things don't gel, and that happens. But I think there's also a bigger problem of people being really harassed and bullied in the workplace. And it's under addressed. It's talked about a lot, but it's not addressed a lot by organizations. And I've come across a few organizations that are really filling that gap. One of them, and you might know if you too know, I'd love to know about others. There's one called Hear You, and it's an app where people can anonymously report bullying and harassment in the workplace. And the other one is Bernard and Associates. They are workplace investigators, and they have a whistleblower platform that companies can use. So those would be ones that I would definitely check out, because you can have one person who it almost causes like a parasitic effect in your organization. And unless you're really willing to take a hard look at what's going on and allow people a safe place to report the behavior, you might find yourself in a crisis, and you have a ton of people resigning in a specific region or a department. They don't even have to resign for it to be a problem. It could just be like their engagement is really low. And like I said, and I wrote about it in my book as well, about how these kind of people in workplaces can be really hard to identify, because they are great about like looking passionate. And their passion can be misunderstood, right? And they're really good at managing up. And you know, there's a really great criminal psychologist who's based out of Alberta, and he spent his life studying psychopathy. And he contributed to the book Snakes in Suits. And he also wrote a book called Without Conscience: The Psychopaths Who Live Among Us. And he predicts, believe it or not, and I don't want to scare anybody, but 4 to 5% of the North American population are at what he would describe as non-murderous psychopaths. And in that book, he talks about how they're very good at mimicking the behavior that gets them what they want. So they know how to show up to engage people, to imprint positively, right?
Yeah.
And that's part of what makes them so dangerous, but they're incredibly prevalent. And no amount of training is going to make them a better manager, right? And no matter how we show up with them, their behavior will not change. And I think what happens is a lot of employees will take it on themselves, like, oh, if I just do it this way, oh, if I just show up this way, it will never work. They will never change their behavior. And it's scary, right? Because these are people that are damaging people on a deep level. And I know from experience, talking with people who have gone through this, it's really hard for them to recover from that psychologically.
Yeah. And yeah, there's another tool there called All Voices where it's similar. You can report anonymously. And some of the tools also have a function where then HR or a manager or whoever is the admin of that program can respond. And then you can have this two-way conversation, but it stays anonymous. So you can be like, because sometimes you get that anonymous tip and you're like, I can't, there's not enough information here. I can't do anything with this. And so you can't get action on it, or you can only action on it in a very broad way. And so having that capability to be like, okay, like, please, can you give me some more information? Please, can you how can I get more information out of this person without compromising that integrity and that anonymity? There's a question coming in from my blueprint coming in. Let's just tackle this right now because I think it's really good. Sure. So I'm going to bring it up onto the screen. So what do you do when you receive consistent constructive feedback over and over again, specifically when the team tries to carry out initiatives to help resolve them, but they don't seem to make a difference? Or alternatively, how do you tell people when you have limitations at the company where you can't realistically tackle a certain problem without disengaging them further? I think this is so important. I think it comes back to that feedback of when you're in those meetings and you get all this feedback of, saying what you can and cannot action on, and then why you can and cannot action on. And sometimes it's like, we don't have the resources now. My team's focusing on these things that were deemed more important, and that will be added to the backlog and addressed in another quarter. I think bringing people along for the ride and being very transparent with them about that feedback, and saying, I love this feedback. I appreciate this feedback. This is what I'm going to do with this feedback. I'm going to take it. I'm going to create this add it into our roadmap. I'm going to take it with Q3 because that's when I think I can get to it. Because I have these, as an HR department, I've got these other 17 things that are in process and need to be finished before I can action on this. And then I'll bring you back for the lab and I'll loop you back in when we start this process. Or if it gets delayed again, I'll bring you back in and let you know. And so I think bringing people along for the ride, making it transparent, and closing that loop is really, really important when it comes to that feedback. And sometimes you just can't do everything, and that's the facts of life. And if we try to do everything, we'll burn out and we'll crash and burn as HR executives and HR leaders.
Yes.
But you have to let people know why you can't do it. And I think that's really hard for us sometimes to admit why we can't do things.
And I think it's probably hard to say no to doing things, right? And so again, with all the best intentions, that people will say, oh yes, we're going to help you. We're going to do something about this. And they just simply can't get to it. So that can be a really tough one as well.
Yeah. And if it's a really serious problem, then that might mean talking to leadership or, looking internally and being like, we need to reassess our quarterly goals because this is a really important thing that now takes precedent over this other thing that we're going to shift down. And, and letting people know that this is going to move some priorities around. And, that's also okay. But I think really letting people know the why of why you can't do something. Or if you do keep, and I hope this is answering your question, let us know if this is answering your question. And, if you are giving feedback to somebody and that isn't being actioned upon, then maybe that skip level conversation of going to their manager, or if it's the CEO and you're giving them feedback that's not being actioned on, maybe you have to take a look at whether you want to still be at that organization or not. And that, again, is just the hard truth that sometimes has to be stated.
Yeah. And reminding people what has been achieved based on previous feedback that you have actioned, so that they do have faith that if you say you're going to address it, but later that you will. Yeah.
And I think that's where that transparency comes in really well. Like, we have a transparent HR roadmap here at Guusto where all of our things that we're doing are open to the entire organization. And so people can see what we're doing on a consistent basis in our projects that we're working on and our quarterly goals. And so it's very easy for anyone to kind of take a peek behind the curtain and say, oh, this is what they're working on. Okay, cool. And this is the
Yeah.
feedback we gave them, and it is being actioned on.
Yeah, that's really good. That's a really good way to handle it, having that sort of transparency built in.
Awesome. So we've talked a little bit about the pre-boarding, onboarding, a bit about the employee journey kind of throughout the process. If you want to learn more about, I also recommend doing around some employee journey mapping. Again, that's a whole other webinar. I know PYN has some great resources on employee journey mapping as well. So I'd go recommend checking out what they're doing. And that'll help you kind of build out how do you keep people engaged throughout their whole sort of life cycle at the organization. But let's talk about offboarding, because again, this is so crucial. And I think a lot of companies do it really poorly. And a lot of times it's like they almost take it personally that somebody's leaving their organization for another role. And it's like, well, to hell with you then. And I don't want to deal with you because you're leaving here, which I just think is totally the wrong way to take it. But I know, I mean, you help a lot of organizations better their offboarding program. And you know, we talked about exit interviews a little bit, but it's more than just an exit interview. So what else are you doing? What else are you working with your clients? What else are you seeing that works really
Yes. So I'll say a few things. One thing I want to make clear is when we talk about offboarding, we really mean when companies are laying people off and how they handle that process. So that's one way, but there is, of course, great ways to offboard people, like ways that are better and worse to offboard people when it's their decision to leave. And you're right, a lot of companies do handle it badly, but we've seen a lot of instances, and I'm sure you have too, Noah, in a lot of the organization you've worked in, where you have those boomerang employees, right? They leave. Make it easy for people to come back. Like, again, we have a labor shortage. This person might have truly believed the grass is greener on the other side for whatever reason. So make sure that when you're talking to them as they're exiting, hey, the door is open. We really like you. I'm sorry that you're leaving, but do not hesitate to contact us, because it takes a lot to come back and say, hey, I've made a mistake, but this is not what I thought it was going to be. And you see that a lot when people have worked for businesses for 7 years or more. They will leave because they haven't had that exposure to another business. And they're like, maybe something is better over here and I should give it a try. And then they go, and it's like within the first month, they realize they've made a mistake. Make sure they can continue with their benefits, their seniority. Like, don't start taking things away that you don't need to, right? Just put them back on the system as if they never left, and everyone will be better off, right? And maybe there's a timeline to that. Maybe it's a year. Keep in touch with them. If you're a manager and you really like that team member and you know that role is going to be open for a while, keep the line of communication open. And LinkedIn makes that so easy too, right? Yeah. So that's definitely, and you do want to have those exit interviews for sure and understand what has driven them to make the decision that they've made. But when you're thinking about when you lay staff off, one of the biggest things, if you can, and I know not every business can do this, but if you can, we at First 30 really prefer when companies take what we call the soft gloves versus the amputation approach to layoffs. So if you know that you're going to have to reduce your workforce for whatever reason, and there's a lot of really good reasons for needing to make changes, right? And I think that people do understand this, the more that they're seeing how quickly the world is changing, right? So give them the 4 to 6 weeks working notice. And that way they can feel like they leave with dignity. They get a chance to say goodbye to people and say to them, we understand you're going to be looking for a new job. We will help you do that. You can use your computer and our printer for your resume, right? And we really want to see you succeed. And during that time, we're going to look and see if there's other roles in the organization that you can apply for. And, I can't even tell you the difference that makes for people psychologically, not just the people who are leaving, but the people who are left behind. Because they lose their focus, right? Like all of a sudden a bomb goes off in their organization. They're looking around for their friends and realizing that some people aren't there anymore. This is like, okay, and they will feel confident. Like if the worst happens, I'm not going to be like walked out the door with security. That's the worst feeling. Like, I don't know if you've ever had that experience. I have. and a funny thing, that same company contacted me a few months later and asked me if I would come back. I'm like, you had me walked out with a security escort. I mean, it was a mass layoff, and I get it. I get it. But it's still hard emotionally. It's really tough, and you don't forget that experience, right? But if a company says, we're going to keep you here, we're going to help you, that's, and of course, as First 30, we say offer career transition counseling, because that will really help someone recover more quickly, and then get back to work. So our data shows us that we have people back to work within 3 months to a job that's of equal, lateral move or even better. So that can make a huge difference to people. They're not going to be focusing on what went wrong with that company. They're going to be moving forward with their lives.
Yeah, and it's taking the human approach to it, right? Like layoffs are terrible. Sometimes they are necessary. I think in tech, sometimes the people are a little trigger happy with their layoffs. But taking that human approach to it of like, okay, like this is a reorg. What roles can we move people into before we just kind of pull the trigger? How can we support you best in this transition? What resources can we give you? What leeway can we give you? What time can we give you? Because time is so important in these moments. And yeah, I think it's bringing humanity back into something that is so wrought with emotion,
right?
Doesn't feel good. So I think like I love this approach of like giving that working notice, letting people have access to the resources, letting them have chances to interview for roles within the organization that are still being hired for, and letting them have that goodbye period. Like you said, it's not just like a bomb went off and like, all right, you all 20% of you all got an email, you need to leave now. Or oh, you show up to the office and your key card no longer works and you're like, what's going on here? And you look at your phone and you got an email saying you're laid off. Like we've all heard these stories, and it's like that person's going to walk away from that experience being like, I'll never work for this company again.
Yeah. And I'm not going to say good things about working for this company, even though I had some good experiences here, right? Like that can affect your Glassdoor reviews. There's just so many things that can go wrong when we handle it poorly. Because there's a human, like you said, there's a human at the other end of all of that. With, for me, I have my dog to support, and you have my kids. I have, you have your family. Whatever it is, you have a mortgage to pay, rent to pay. So it's really traumatizing for people.
Yeah. So I think bringing that humanity back, and I think that's the kind of a theme that we're seeing across this whole employer journey that we're talking about, is making sure that you're treating the other person as a human who is a whole person and not just another number that is part of your organization, and making sure that they are, you're giving them flexibility, you're giving them resources, you're giving them, some autonomy on how they want to be learning, how they want to be growing, how they want to leave the organization, and making sure that they're supported in all of those decisions and all those different stages of their journey throughout the organization as well. So I think that's great. And so, Amy, we're kind of coming up on time.
Yeah.
We have 3 minutes left.
Yeah.
So if you had to kind of say one thing to our audience about, like, don't let the love run out, what would that one thing be? So they can walk away with that one little tidbit, one little theme that they kind of like hold true for the next little while.
Keep talking to your employees, and then when you get that feedback, take action. That is there's a lot of different ways we can look at this, but if you're thinking about don't let the love run out, keep engaging and understanding what is going well, what is going wrong. And if you make that investment in time or whatever resources you need, you will see a tremendous difference in in churn and in retention rates for your organization.
I love it. Yeah. Keep the conversation going, treat people as humans, and the benefits will outweigh any of the costs that come with that. Awesome. Well, thanks again, everyone, for joining. Don't let the love run out. If you want to learn anything more about Guusto, don't be afraid to reach out. If you want to chat more about recognition or about what First 30 does, reach out to either myself or Amy on LinkedIn. I know we're both pretty active on LinkedIn. We love LinkedIn. Let us know. Shoot us a message. Have a conversation with us. And I also wanted to chat a little bit about our culture is the ultimate advantage guide that we built here over at Guusto. And so this talks about all of the things that we talked about today, plus so much more. It's a white paper. It really dives deep into why culture is really the only advantage that organizations have these days. So check it out at guusto.com/culture-advantage.
And as someone who has read it, I can tell you that it is worth a read. And I'm currently writing my next book, and I will be using some of the insights there for that. And don't worry, I'll make sure I quote you guys. But it is awesome. And do you mind if I just add a couple things, Noah, about
of course, yeah, go ahead.
30? We have an event coming up in early March, and I know that there's going to be a landing page sent out to you, and you can register for that event there as well about how to build your onboarding program, and we'll take you through the steps to do that, because that's one of the things we were talking about today. So there's a few links there, and we have some replays on our website as well. So we talked about pre-boarding and a buddy program, and we have a number of replays that you can access. If you kind of take a little tour through the website, you can find that there too. So sorry to interrupt you. I thought I'd just throw that in there.
Not at all. No. If you want to learn how to build an onboarding program, go check it out. And I'm sure there's a lot of great information in there and a lot of practical steps that you can take apart. And I know we kept things a little bit high level here, so that'll be a nice deep dive into that first sort of piece of an employee's journey. And with that, thanks everyone. We're at time. Thank you for joining us. I appreciate you giving us an hour of your time. And we hope to see you at our next webinar. And don't be afraid to reach out to myself or Amy with any questions, or if you just want to connect on LinkedIn. Thanks all.